Welcome to Pages and Pods. Rudolf Steiner taught that ancient Egypt was part of the continuing journey of the human soul. In this episode, we explore his vision of reincarnation, Atlantis, the Seven Rishis, Zarathustra, Hermes Trismegistus, and the seven post-Atlantean cultural epochs. Steiner believed that the spiritual wisdom of Egypt helped prepare our current consciousness, and that in our present age, we must transform ancient clairvoyance into a new spiritual perception attained through the human intellect and the Christ impulse. There is much online confusion regarding the mysteries of Egypt's past. The internet is filled with claims about aliens, secret government conspiracies, and sensational theories crafted as clickbait distractions, but not written to develop deep understanding. But if we look back in time to the lectures of Rudolf Steiner, the wonders of the pyramids and sacred temples carries a message about the formation of modern consciousness. Within his framing, he calls us to action to continue the cosmological destiny of Earth's evolution. Steiner begins his first lecture about Egyptian myth and mysteries with a quote from Goethe saying, "From the power that binds all beings, that man frees himself who overcomes himself." He explained this as follows: "The soul that overcomes itself finds the path that leads beyond the ego to the highest treasures of humanity." It may seem strange to suggest that connections exist between our own time and ancient Egypt. When the mighty pyramids and the Sphinx appeared, you see, by understanding our journey to the present, we will, in Steiner's words, discover the possibility of transcending ourselves. And in this 1908 lecture titled Egyptian Myths and Mysteries, he directs us to approach the subject as part of our life aim. That is, as a guide to discover the deepest and most significant forces within our souls. But how can this be? What can we learn from a culture that was covered over by desert sands over 2,000 years ago? He makes this point very clear. It's because we were there as the souls of those who lived a physical existence in ancient times. Yet he goes further by inviting us to seek our deepest clairvoyance through spiritual science, to consider an even older time, to an age we only vaguely know as Atlantis, and to the ancient travelers who escaped the great deluge that engulfed it. We were there too, but was there such a place? Modern discoveries such as Göbekli Tepe and the other ancient tepes of Anatolia do not prove Atlantis, but they do challenge simple assumptions about early humanity. More than 11,000 years ago, communities using stone tools were organizing labor, carving massive pillars, and constructing monumental sacred sites. How did such ancient cultures develop the knowledge, coordination, and purpose required to build them? To understand Steiner's vision, we must understand reincarnation as this journey of the soul through spans of time, scarcely within our imagination. As I just said, he does not stop with ancient Egypt, but directs our attention towards Atlantis, where our souls lived in human forms unlike those of today. In Steiner's account, the human body and the earth evolved together, and as the planet gradually condensed into more material form, the human organism also became more physical and clearly defined. He challenges us to remember back even further to a time before Atlantis, in which he describes Lemuria, a stage of human and earthly evolution known only through clairvoyance and spiritual science. Human bodies were softer and less clearly formed because the earth itself had not fully condensed. Should we dismiss considerations of the human past merely because to imagine it exceeds our present vocabulary, or that science through instrumentation and archaeology has yet to find it? We should be cautious about assuming that surviving evidence tells the whole story, or that our civilization represents the only summit humanity has ever reached. The pyramids are evidence of that ancient people living without satellites, telescopes, and GPS. How could they construct monumental structures aligned to the cardinal directions and to the stars? What other chapters of human development have vanished beneath seas and sediments and ice? Scientific evidence exists that anatomically similar humans, presumably with the same capabilities of our own, existed over 300,000 years ago. Is it really possible that intelligent humans lived like cavemen until the end of the last ice age? A sufficiently great catastrophe, perhaps a comet strike, a volcanic winter, or extreme solar storm, could shatter our modern infrastructure and leave those survivors struggling with rudimentary tools. We have no material evidence that Lemuria or Atlantis existed, nor any reliable way to assign it to a date. Yet, hundreds of thousands of years, how can it be possible that human culture did not arise and disappear, that archaeology has not yet recovered or may ever recover? Before we go further, and this is especially relevant for skeptics, we must understand the epistemological framework through which Rudolf Steiner approached human history. His spiritual science describes a world in which early humanity possessed forms of supersensible perception and spiritual technology that cannot be judged solely by surviving tools or material remains, in which divine or superhuman beings guided early cultures, and in which humanity's increasing physical densification, sexual differentiation, individualization, and attachment to material existence were only stages in a long evolution of our consciousness. In fact, according to Steiner, there was a time during Atlantis when humans walked side by side with beings from the higher realms. Mainstream science does not accept this framework because it cannot be verified through ordinary material methods. Yet, scientific models themselves are continually revising as new discoveries reshape our understanding of astrophysics, cosmology, and quantum reality. Neither material science or spiritual science presently truly understands the nature of existence. But through spiritual science, Steiner describes how survivors of Atlantis migrated toward the lower latitudes and carried remnants of Atlantean wisdom into cultures already living there, preparing those cultures, such as India, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, for future development. This raises an extraordinary question. If Atlantis reached its final destruction near the end of the Ice Age, how long did that civilization endure? How far back does the journey of the human soul extend? Steiner asks us to imagine that we lived through Atlantean times, as well as Lemuria before it, but not in our present bodies, in earlier forms suited to the conditions of the earth at that time. Steiner begins the post-Atlantean migrations with Manu, the great initiate who led a selected group of advanced Atlanteans to India, carrying their Atlantean cultural impulses with them. Manu appointed the 7 holy rishis as teachers of the first post-Atlantean Indian culture, whose primeval wisdom survives as remnant passages in the Vedas. In the second post-Atlantean epoch, Zarathustra transformed this inheritance into the ancient Persian vision of Ahura Mazda, the great sun being, opposed by Ahriman, the power drawing humanity towards material existence. In Egypt, during the third post-Atlantean age, Steiner identifies Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Thoth, as an initiate who developed from the Zarathustra mysteries. In Steiner's words, Thoth showed to men the entire physical world as the handwriting of the gods. He taught the Egyptians to read the physical world as the visible expression of divine spiritual powers. It was Thoth who shaped the ancient Egyptian culture known to us today. Within this transmission of spiritual wisdom, Steiner describes a still greater wheel of development, the 7 post-Atlantean cultural epochs. The first was the ancient Indian epoch of the 7 Rishis. The second, the ancient Persian epoch of Zarathustra. The third, the Egypto-Chaldean epoch explored in his lectures. And the fourth, the Greco-Roman epoch, from which the Christ impulse entered human consciousness. We now live in the 5th epoch, which Steiner describes as a recapitulation of the 3rd. The spiritual impulses once expressed through Egyptian cultural wisdom and Chaldean star knowledge are returning to be transformed into a new intellectual clairvoyance by modern humanity. So why aren't we building pyramids and following pharaohs? Because between the 3rd and the 5th epoch came the Christ impulse. During the Greco-Roman epoch, humanity lost its inherited clairvoyance and turned inward, developing individual personality, intellectual reflection, and knowledge gained through the physical senses. This separation from the gods was necessary that humanity could later approach the spiritual world freely and consciously, not through atavistic vision, but through the awakening self and Christ consciousness. Most importantly, the mystery of Golgotha brought into all humanity what had previously occurred only within the temple mysteries, the ability for anyone willing to develop their spiritual perception to know the higher spiritual planes could achieve this. The path to the divine no longer belongs solely to a closed circle of initiates, but was possible for all humanity through the Christ impulse. The mission of our epoch is to prepare the foundation for the 6th cultural epoch and the next stage of Earth and human development. To do so, we must recognize the spiritual impulses cultivated by the Egyptian initiates and carried forward to present times. The 5th epoch is not merely a repetition of the Egyptian times, but a transformation of humanity's relationship with the divine. The ancient inherited clairvoyance of the Egyptians must now be regained through awakened thought, spiritual discipline, and the Christ impulse. Rudolf Steiner explains how the Egyptian initiates imprinted souls to carry an understanding of material reality, which, in our current times, must be overcome and transformed. In the next episode, we'll examine how the Egyptian initiates prepared the human soul for our own age. Subscribe if you'd like to continue that journey with me.